Hi, I'm Wind Goodfriend. I've never been someone who fit in. As a child, I had symptoms of both autism spectrum disorder and Tourette's syndrome. My personality has always made me unique. But when I took an introduction to psychology class in high school, I knew from the very beginning I had found my inspiration. Studying psychology has offered the keys to unlocking an understanding of human interaction. I went on to earn my master's and doctorate in social psychology from Purdue University, and now I'm a full professor. I've been working in the field for over 20 years, designing and implementing research studies, teaching courses, and mentoring students. I've written or co-authored over 100 publications, including award-winning textbooks and empirical journal articles. How to Stop People Pleasing is my third audio course with the Great Courses. It's the first one fully devoted to applying theory and research to help you change your patterns of behavior. Every time I read about or conduct my own research in psychology, I think about how it might help my life. In this course, I hope I can share some of that information and insight with you. I'm Wind Goodfriend, and I hope you enjoy this Audible original. Lecture 1: The Consequences of Perpetual Yes. You're allowed to prioritize yourself. You're allowed to value and protect yourself. It's okay for you to say no. If you're taking the time to listen to this course, you might have trouble believing the 3 things I've just said, or at least in following through with the actions needed to back them up. You're probably what I'm going to call a perpetual people pleaser. You genuinely want people to like you, and I'm guessing that most people do. I bet you're a really nice person. I bet you sincerely care about making other people happy, and that you're willing to sacrifice your own needs, your own comfort, for the good of others. But if you're taking the time to listen to this course, it might also mean that you're getting tired of sacrificing all the time. Sacrificing your own needs to make others happy can feel good in the short term, but it becomes a problem if you have a hard time saying no. If you desperately want others to like you, if you avoid conflict, or your entire identity is about being a martyr, you might find that you never have time for yourself. You might be exhausted. You might be stressed out to the point where you're having symptoms of both mental and physical health issues. People might even be abusing your tendency to be so nice, and it's possible you're starting to resent them. But there's good news. You've decided to listen to this course, which means you've already taken the first step in making a change. You know that what you've been doing so far isn't healthy. You just need a bit of help making a change. I hope that this course helps you do that. Take what works and discard what doesn't. Everyone's situation is unique, so there's no advice that applies to every case. The point of the 5 lectures I've created is to be helpful, meaningful, and practical. Let me start by explaining what each of the lectures in this course is going to cover. In this first one, I'll give you a bit of background on who I am and why I have the academic credentials to teach this course. I'll also explain how this course is different from the other books and resources about people-pleasing you could use. And finally, I'll help you think about what kind of people pleaser you might be and some of the consequences you might be dealing with. Lecture 2 is called The Pleasing Personality. Its goal is to help you understand how psychology defines various personality traits related to people-pleasing, or the lack of setting healthy interpersonal boundaries. In Lecture 2, I'll present you with several brief surveys, kind of like little scientific quizzes, where you can score yourself on these personality traits to get an idea of the scope of the problem. In Lecture 3, called Why Am I Like This?, We'll dive into the question of why you feel the need to please other people so much. In other words, we'll think about the driving force or psychological motivation behind your behaviors. Is it something about your childhood? Have you learned that pleasing others will lead to rewards? Or are you afraid of disappointing people for some reason? Are you letting other people shape your sense of identity and set goals for your future instead of following your heart? Once we've analyzed your current behavior to understand how you've gotten to where you are now, Lecture 4 will encourage you to start the process of change. Titled Prioritizing Me, Lecture 4 will take you through several exercises you can try that will help you break your behavioral patterns. The exercises focus on self care, boosting your self esteem, and understanding why healthy boundaries are so important. Finally, Lecture 5 is called How to Say No Politely. It will provide practical tips on how to keep your new skills and perspectives fresh and strong. I'll give you specific examples of how to say no to people in a variety of ways that you can apply to many settings and a memory device to help you remember them. Throughout the course, I'll explain the ideas through evidence and research studies from the field of psychology. And that brings me to the two reasons why this course is different from the other courses, books, and resources on this general topic. Why choose this course compared to the dozens of others? The first reason is that I have a PhD in social psychology. Textbooks define social psychology as the study of how people influence each other, how our everyday thoughts, emotions, and perceptions change due to the fact that we live in a social world. Research topics in this subfield of psychology include conformity, persuasion, attraction, prejudice, and so on. I like to emphasize that social psychology is where the study of the human experience intersects with social justice. Most social psychologists have a passion for making the world a better place. We use scientific theories and research studies to understand why people suffer and how individuals can move from simply surviving to thriving. That is the academic background I bring to this course. I got my doctorate from Purdue University, and I've been a professor for 20 years. Some of the resources I checked out to prepare this course were written by people with no scholarly background at all. Many of them were written by people from a business background. They'll likely help you build your confidence, but might not be good at analyzing why you do what you do. Some other resources are written by clinical or counseling psychologists. Those books will be good at helping you understand yourself better and might help you change your behaviors, but they might not be able to explain the research as well. It's important for me to clarify that while I have a doctorate in psychology, I am not a mental health professional. I don't have a license in counseling or therapy, and I don't see clients for any kind of personal coaching. I am a professor and a researcher. But I have mentored hundreds of college students over the years, helping empower them and build their confidence to apply for internships and get into graduate school. And I've published over 100 of my own research studies and books, including textbooks. So I offer you the research expertise of a professional psychologist. Throughout this course, I'll use my academic background to share scholarly principles and perspectives that will help you understand the psychology of why you find it hard to say no, what drives people-pleasing behavior, and how you can change your behavioral patterns. There's a second reason I think this course is different from the other resources I've seen. Before writing this course, I read about 24 of the other books about how to say no and set boundaries. All of them were written by someone who said they could relate to you, the listener or reader, because they too used to be a people pleaser. I'm going to tell you right now that I am not like that. I do not lack confidence. I've been called bold, assertive, even brazen. I'm explaining this not to brag about it, but because if you're going to take me seriously, you should know who is giving you advice and whether I have the credentials to do so. It's a joke amongst my students that I'm a role model of confidence. I have an extremely low level of anxiety, such that I've traveled the world, including spending a week in North Korea. I recently told my boss at work that I needed both a significant raise and a better title if they wanted me to continue to teach classes and serve as an administrator. I got double the raise they originally offered me, and I'm now the assistant dean of my college. I even negotiated how much I'm getting paid for this course. I have the same tendencies in my personal life. I was married for 14 years. When I found out my partner had cheated on me, I handed my wedding ring to him and told him we were done. The next day, I went to the bank and separated our accounts. I spent the following week teaching myself divorce law, and I represented myself in court. I kept our house and our pets, we didn't have children, and I made him pay me $10,000 in personal damages. 2 months later, he moved to China, and I've never seen him again. All this said, I'm not perfect. I still sometimes say yes when I should say no. I tend to be a bit of a workaholic, partially because I do care what others think of me. I want to impress people and have them think well of me, so I say yes to being on task forces or committees at work, even when they are unpaid or will take time away from my own research, or mean I have a meeting in the evenings or on a weekend. Sometimes I'll help a friend when I don't really want to, or attend a function and keep my opinion to myself to avoid conflicts. We're all human, and we all want people to like us and accept us as part of a loving community. So I get it. But my point is that I'm not a recovering people pleaser. So my perspective in writing this course is going to be different from those of other authors. Again, this might work for you, and it might not. My hope is that if nothing else, this course is at least different from the 20 or 30 other options. Here's an example of how I hope this course can help you. I want to share a research study that explored a really important question. Why is people pleasing a bad thing? This study was published in the year 2019 in a peer-reviewed journal and was conducted by two researchers, one from Stockton University and the other from Princeton University. The reason I chose it for this course is that it's the type of study we call a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis means that instead of looking at the results from just one group of people, it looks at many studies. In this case, the researchers statistically combined the results from 90 separate studies published over many years and from over 30,000 participants across 15 different countries. That means that we can trust that the patterns we see are much more likely to be stable, reliable, and valid. The researchers included a wide variety of studies on people-pleasing behaviors and asked a lot of different questions, such as what factors predict likelihood of these behaviors, whether culture matters, and what the consequences of these habits are. First, the researchers defined people-pleasing, or sociotropy as they called it, as made up of three specific components: excessive worry about how other people view you, dependency on other people for social support or validation of your self-esteem, and the desire to behave in ways that make other people happy. This means avoiding disapproval and a high investment in maintaining relationships, including a willingness to sacrifice your own well-being for the benefit of others. People with high levels of these behaviors usually avoid being alone, apologize a lot, and feel particularly good or bad about themselves based on the feedback they get from other people. This meta-analysis found several important results. One outcome was that women are significantly more likely to be people pleasers compared to men. But interestingly, this gender difference depends on world culture. In countries where the culture emphasizes interpersonal harmony and the good of the group over the good of the individual, that gender difference mostly went down. But in cultures like the United States, Canada, and similar countries, women are more likely to sacrifice their happiness for others compared to men. When the researchers summarized the negative consequences of people pleasing behaviors, they noted that the lack of healthy boundaries and constantly putting other people first has a variety of negative outcomes. If you are doing this, you probably already know the toll this takes on you. The study mentioned consistent ties to symptoms of mental health issues, such as depression, anxiety, guilt, and shame. Other studies, such as one published in 2017 that followed over 400 medical patients over 5 years, found that high levels of people pleasing are also tied to physical health problems, such as chronic back pain, muscle aches, and frequent illnesses. But I also want to mention something positive about the results of the meta analysis. They found that people pleasing behaviors could decrease as people got older and further away from the adolescent stage of life. This is a really important finding for anyone who wants to change their behaviors. It means that you can be optimistic about your ability to break bad habits and take control of your future. By listening to this course, you've already taken the first step toward doing that. The key to this entire course is that it's okay to say no and to set healthy boundaries for yourself. It's okay to prioritize yourself and your own needs. The goal will be for you to do that while still being polite, empathetic, and respectful. This isn't a course about how to be a selfish, narcissistic jerk. That's really not the point. Sometimes, of course, we have to please other people. Sometimes we have to sacrifice our own comfort or preferences or priorities for the good of the group, or because it's what our boss demands of us, or because we need to compromise in our intimate relationships. I'm not going to say that you should always say no. That's not realistic or reasonable. We don't live in a dichotomous world. We live in a world of nuance. This course is about helping you have the confidence to set healthy boundaries around your time, money, body, and life in general, so that you can decide what is acceptable and comfortable for you, and then have the confidence to follow through with that conviction. If other people try to push past your boundaries after you've politely established them, they are the ones who are being disrespectful and selfish, not you. To help me make this point, I want to define psychological boundaries. In the Better Boundaries Workbook, licensed counselor and social worker Sharon Martin defined them like this. A boundary is a dividing line that defines who you are as an individual and how you will interact with others. Boundaries define what's me, my body, my feelings, my property, my responsibilities, and so forth, and what's not me. Boundaries also communicate how we want to be treated by others, what's okay and not okay with us, and how close we want to get physically and emotionally to others. I really like her definition, and I think it's helpful in seeing why saying no isn't selfish. Think of a physical boundary, like a fence around your house. It can be beautiful and graceful, but its purpose is simply to let people know that this is your personal space. It helps contain the people you care about, and it stops other people from encroaching on your property without your permission. If someone else simply stepped over the fence around your yard and started up their own party without your permission, especially after you asked them not to, you would realize that they were being disrespectful. It's the same when people cross your psychological boundaries. You deserve to have people honor them, and it's abuse when they don't. Now that we've discussed some general facts about people pleasing, let me note that there are different kinds of people pleasers. Several of the resources I read outlined different frameworks for categorizing individuals based on motives or behaviors. One that I thought was interesting was presented by the late Dr. Harriet Breaker, who had a PhD in both clinical and social psychology. In her book, The Disease to Please, she suggested that the need to constantly please others comes from three different components. These three components are mindsets, habits, and feelings. The three components can be pictured as a triangle, making up three sides to someone's personality. The first side of the triangle is mindsets, which are distorted ways of thinking about other people, situations, or yourself that lead you to constantly say yes. A common distortion is the belief that you won't be satisfied unless every single person in your life approves of you and likes you. Another problematic belief is that by pleasing everyone else all the time, you'll protect yourself from hurtful treatment or abuse. Specific kinds of toxic beliefs often have the word should in them, along with absolutes like never or always. Examples are I should never hurt anyone's feelings, and I should always put other people first before me. But doing that just isn't realistic or sustainable. The second side of the triangle is habits. Habits are behaviors you might have been doing for so long that you don't even realize the extent to which they control your life. Or you might find it extremely difficult to break your pattern of behaviors because they're so automatic. You tend to agree to things, conform to what others want you to do, or fail to speak up for yourself immediately without even considering there are other options available to you. It's also possible that you continue to please others because doing so has become a psychological addiction. The gratification you feel when others thank you or when you feel loved and accepted is so validating that you crave it and are always looking for your next fix. But just like any other unhealthy habit or addiction, you know that you need to change the behavior to live a better life. Finally, the third side of the triangle is feelings or emotions. Emotional people pleasers are driven by deep seated fears and anxieties. They avoid confrontation by relinquishing control of any decisions to other people. Essentially, these folks are only comfortable with happy, calm emotions and do whatever it takes to avoid unpleasant or upsetting emotions. But this behavior can come across as weak or as inauthentic to others. It also means that you're living a life based on fear instead of being willing to take risks and trust that your loved ones truly respect and value you. Dr. Breaker noted that, of course, there are combinations of these motivations. So you might have two or even all three sides of the triangle if you are a perpetual people pleaser. In research psychology, we summarize the three components she's identified with what we call the ABC model. The A stands for affect, which is a fancy term psychologists use for how people express emotions. The B stands for behavior, and the C stands for cognition, or thought patterns. The ABC model can be applied to a variety of human experiences. For example, we say that stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination fall along the ABC model. Stereotypes are what we think about other groups. That's the C, or cognitive thoughts. Prejudice is how we emotionally feel about other groups, so that's the A for affect. And when we engage in biased actions toward other groups, that's the B for behavior. So even though the letters are slightly out of order here, all three components are there: thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Most of the human experience is made up of these three aspects of psychology, so it's a useful model to consider. When you find yourself saying yes to things you don't want to do, is it because you think you have to, because of how you're perceiving the situation? In other words, maybe you have a distorted cognition? Or is it because you're afraid of the emotional consequences if you say no, which means you're motivated by the affective component? Or finally, maybe you simply say yes because it's what you always do, meaning you have formed an automatic behavioral habit that you're finding it hard to break. As I said before, I personally like this model for thinking about people pleasing because it aligns well with how research psychologists think about defining personality traits, aspects of the mind, and behavioral motivations. However, I also want to offer you a different way to categorize people pleasers, one that you won't find anywhere else. This one is much less technical, so you might like it a lot better or a lot worse. Like everything in this course, pick the one that works better for you. This second model is the result of a conversation I had over dinner with 5 of my friends. I was talking with them about writing this course, and all 5 of them acknowledged that they have been at least moderate people pleasers their entire lives. When I asked them how they would describe exactly what kind of people pleaser they were, they spontaneously started using metaphors and similes of animals to describe their motivations and behaviors. Let me share what they came up with. Admittedly, this part of the course is not based on scientific research, unlike everything else I'm going to cover, but it comes from real people explaining their real lives, and they wanted me to share it with you. One friend told me that she is like a worker bee. She works extra hard all the time, trying to be perfect. She's always the first at work and the last to go home, getting the most done and trying to be the figurative employee of the month, even though her company doesn't actually have that award. She said that it's exhausting, but she defines herself as the perfect employee, the perfect friend, the one who's always there when needed. Another friend spoke up and said that she's more like a zebra. She likes to fade into the background and not be noticed. She said that she almost never speaks up for herself and that she never suggests an idea to her friends or at work unless she thinks the idea will be liked and accepted. She never disagrees with people. She said she picked a zebra to describe herself because she thinks of herself as a shy, quiet, gentle spirit. At that point, a third friend told me that sometimes she's shy and gentle, but at other times she's loud and gregarious. This friend purposely tries to fit wherever she is and match the people she's with. She said that sometimes she doesn't even feel like she has her own personality because she just shifts to reflect whatever she sees around her. So we decided that she's more like a chameleon, trying to please others by copying whatever they do. My fourth friend told me that she's a golden retriever. When I asked her to explain, she said that when she was growing up, her childhood included witnessing abuse from her father toward her mother, and sometimes she was the target of abuse herself. She quickly learned which behaviors earned rewards and which led to punishment. Now, as an adult, she said that this deep need to please others had become ingrained in her because she simply had a fear of displeasing others. Her anxiety as the result of her childhood trauma led to her outward bubbly personality, just like a golden retriever, but also her instinctive feeling of inferiority. She also pointed out that, unfortunately, Being treated badly by others had been normalized for her. She now carries an automatic habit of avoiding conflict at almost any cost. Finally, my fifth friend was a little different from the others. She's known in our group as being the passionate, fiery one, and she volunteers for every committee, donates to charities, mentors in youth programs, teaches after school classes, and in short, has no spare time for herself. She didn't have an animal to describe herself, but the rest of us quickly described her as a mama bear. This friend is a fantastic mentor and parent, a champion for community causes, and yes, we love her for it. But it's also true that she is constantly taking on responsibility for everyone else's life and trying to save the world. I often see this kind of personality in nurses, social workers, teachers, counselors, and similar professions, based on helping clients or children. It's admirable in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's important to set limits and make sure you're taking care of yourself while you're trying to save the world. Because my animal metaphors are admittedly not scientific, I want to tell you about one more research study before we end this first lecture. No matter what kind of people pleaser you are, your motivation is probably rooted in the idea that you hope other people will like, respect, and accept you. But here's the thing, your actions might be having the opposite effect. In 2010, a series of 4 studies was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. The researchers planned to investigate how, within groups of people who all chip in for a common cause, individuals who selfishly take more than their fair share are judged negatively. It's like when you order a bunch of pizzas and everyone contributes money, and someone doesn't pay their fair share, but they still eat a bunch of the food. As the researchers expected, the studies showed that those selfish people are disliked by the others in the group. But the researchers found a surprising result again and again across all 4 studies. Sometimes in these groups, there are overly nice, generous people who contribute more than their fair share. People who, for example, pay for the pizza but only eat one piece, or maybe even don't eat anything at all. The research showed that those people were disliked at equal levels as the selfish people. In other words, the selfish people and the generous, nice people were both seen as displaying undesirable behavior that was disapproved of by everyone else. Why would that be the case? The researchers suggested 2 possible explanations. The first is that both the selfish and the overly nice people were breaking the social rules of the situation. If everyone is expected to pay their fair share, then it appears anyone who pays less is trying to get out of something, and anyone who pays more is potentially showing off. The other possible explanation is that the people who simply did what they were supposed to do may have felt like the overly nice people made them look bad in comparison. Either way, the generous people became as unpopular as the selfish people. You never know how other people are going to view you. You simply can't control other people's thoughts and perceptions. So you might as well live a life that maintains your mental and physical health and happiness and protects yourself and the people you love, as long as you're not hurting anyone else in the process. Whether you're a worker bee, a zebra, a chameleon, a golden retriever, a mama or papa bear, or your own kind of people pleaser, I hope this lecture has offered something interesting and insightful. The next 2 lectures will explore why you might be a people pleaser. And lectures 4 and 5 offer exercises and advice on how to change. But maybe the most important and fundamental step is the belief that you are a good person and deserve to have others respect your needs and boundaries. So, to end this first lecture, I want to go back to how I started by reminding you of 3 fundamental truths I hope you believe. Repeat after me. You're allowed to prioritize yourself. You're allowed to value and protect yourself. It's okay for you to say no. Lecture 2, The Pleasing Personality. Just how much of a people pleaser are you? In other words, what's the scope of the problem? In psychology, when we study any concept, like anxiety or relationship satisfaction or intelligence, we tend to define and measure variables on a range. When we can distinguish people who are extremely high or low on any given concept from people who are average or in the middle, we know which people need treatment or intervention, how much treatment is needed, and the urgency of treatment. In this lecture, the goal is to help you understand your own level of people pleasing. In the next lecture, we'll dive into why you might have these characteristics, what made you the kind of person you are. But for right now, we just want to focus the picture to see what's there. Let's understand what exactly makes up a people pleasing personality. We can define it in a number of different ways. Over the years, research psychologists have offered several specific ideas about exactly what motivates the need to say yes and please others. I'm going to offer you a glimpse into some of these ideas, and you can pick the one that best aligns with your own perspective. The most famous and popular explanation for people pleasing as a general personality trait is an idea called sociotropy. Sociotropy is a word coined by American psychologist Aaron Beck. A professor at the University of Pennsylvania for many years, starting in the 1950s, Beck is best known for creating a form of therapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. Cognitive behavioral therapy is widely regarded as the most effective form of talk therapy because it targets a client's unrealistic thought patterns and expectations, as well as their unhealthy habits and behaviors. Over the years, as Beck worked with clients who came to him for counseling, he developed several techniques for changing people's negative routines into positive ones. Beck came up with the hypothesis that we have 2 basic social drives that make up our personality. The first is autonomy, which is our desire for independence and self-reliance. Autonomy is highly valued in cultures like the United States and Canada, with our cowboy mentality. We praise people who are ambitious, and the American dream is about working hard and achieving personal fame and fortune. Unfortunately, autonomy can also sometimes be tied to aggression and the need to control other people. While a medium level of autonomy is healthy and motivates people to achieve, excessive autonomy leads to domineering competition and selfishness. The second social drive in Beck's hypothesis is that word I mentioned earlier, sociotropy. Sociotropy is our desire for close, intimate relationships with people, our desire to be accepted by others and to live in a community. It's our desire to belong and to be validated. But just as autonomy has its dangers, sociotropy too can become extreme. Excessive levels of sociotropy can lead to desperation, social anxiety, and fears of being alone or being socially ostracized. This is where people pleasing might come into play. Beck believed that a healthy personality would fall right in the middle between sociotropy and autonomy. Both social desires are healthy when taken in moderation, but both can become unhealthy when taken too far. To test his clients in therapy and to research his concepts, Beck and some of his colleagues developed a survey people can take to measure their levels of both traits. The survey is called the Sociotropy Autonomy Scale, or SAS. It was first published in 1983 and then updated in 2000. The full version of the SAS includes 60 statements. When people take it, they read each statement and rate it based on how much they agree with it on a scale ranging from 0 to 4. A score of 0 means you don't agree with the item at all, while a score of 4 means you agree with the item 100%. It's definitely true for you all the time and in all situations, no matter what. You can find the full scale online if you want to take it for yourself. I'm going to give you a brief excerpt from it here, though, so you can get a general idea. Instead of all 60 items from the survey, I'll give you 5 for sociotropy and 5 for autonomy. Let's start with the items that measure sociotropy. Write down your scores and sum them up at the end, or keep a running total in your head as we go. Remember, the response for each is from 0, you don't agree at all, to 4, you agree 100%. Here we go. Number 1. It is important to me to be liked and approved by others. I get uncomfortable around a person who does not clearly like me. Number 3, I am more apologetic to others than I need to be. Number 4, I am afraid of hurting other people's feelings. Number 5, I find it difficult to say no to other people. Okay, so your total score could range from 0 to 20 for those items. The higher your score, the more of a people pleaser you are. Now let's take a look at how Beck measured autonomy. Here are 5 of the items from his scale measuring that social motivation. Again, respond to each item on the same 0 to 4 scale and get the sum total at the end. Number 1. If a goal is important to me, I will pursue it, even if it may make other people uncomfortable. Number 2. If I think I'm right about something, I feel comfortable expressing myself, even if others don't like it. Number 3. I am not influenced by others in what I decide to do. Number 4. It bothers me when people try to direct my behaviors or activities. Number 5. I value my work accomplishments more than I value making friends. What's your total for autonomy? Again, it could range from 0 to 20. Remember, Beck's hypothesis was that having extreme or excessive scores on either of these traits would probably lead to unhealthy cognitive and behavioral patterns. Several research studies have found support for that hypothesis. For example, it seems that high levels of both sociotropy and autonomy are correlated with dysfunctional interpersonal patterns, which then lead to symptoms of depression. People with too much autonomy tends to come across as aloof, domineering, calculating, or vindictive. These perceptions make them seem untrustworthy, which hurts their relationships. And of course, if you're listening to this lecture, you're probably familiar with the other side of the story. You probably know that high scores of sociotropy are tied to people who are perceived as submissive and exploitable, and sometimes targeted by perpetrators of abuse. One study that used Beck's survey of sociotropy found that high scores were correlated with a variety of problems, including depression, avoiding social situations, and participants feeling like other people were exploiting them. Other studies have confirmed the link between sociotropy scores and depression and added the finding that people pleasers are more likely to be depressed, when they are under stressful situations at work or at home. In other words, the negative effects of constantly trying to please other people might be made even worse if you're under additional pressure from outside forces. Beck's research is well known in clinical and counseling psychology. It makes a lot of sense. But there are other possible explanations as to why you might be motivated to please others. Find yourself always saying yes, or fail to stick up for yourself. The field of social psychology, where I received my academic training, offers some possibilities that have to do with how people influence each other. Maybe when you're in a group, you become unsure of your opinions and you let other people sway you. Or it's possible that you know what you think or feel, but your desire to fit in is simply more important than being right. There's a famous study from social psychology back in 1951 that investigated that idea. It was conducted by a professor named Solomon Asch, who wanted to understand why so many people could have participated in the Holocaust during World War II. They did terrible things, and at the time, they knew those behaviors were terrible. So why did they do them? Ash believed that many of the individuals involved with the Nazi movement, the concentration camps, and the rest of the atrocities going on at that time didn't really believe in Hitler's message and weren't truly bad people. Instead, they simply went along with the crowd because of the power of social conformity. They saw that everyone else appeared to support the cause, so it was easy to simply keep their heads down and do what everyone else was doing. Ash believed that for the most part, even if you objectively know that someone is wrong in what they are saying, you won't speak up if you think you're the only one who is going to say something. It's easier to simply please everyone and fit in. On some level, many of us are afraid to be the only one to go against a crowd. Let me describe the procedure Ash used in his famous experiment. As I explain what the participants experienced, try to imagine what you would have done if you had been one of them. You're in college and you show up to a study that you think is about visual judgment. There are about 8 other students there, plus the experimenter, Dr. Ash. Dr. Ash asks all of the participants, including you, to sit on 3 sides of a big rectangular table, like in a dining room or boardroom. No one sits on the 4th side of the table so that Dr. Ash can stand there, next to 2 big easels, on which are several large sets of cards. Each set of cards shows you vertical lines. Your task in the experiment seems quite simple. One of the cards shows you a single straight line. On the other card, there are 3 vertical lines marked A, B, and C. All you have to do is say out loud which line, A, B, or C, is the same length as the line on the first card. The experiment starts. Dr. Ash asks the first participant for the answer, and he says, line B. Several other people say the same thing, line B. Remember that there are a total of 9 participants in the room, 8 other college students plus you. The way you're sitting around the table, 7 other people give their answers before you do. And Dr. Ash always starts with the same person every time there's a new set of lines. For the first 2 sets of lines, you agree with what everyone else says. And you start to think, wow, this experiment is super easy. And frankly, it's going to get boring pretty fast. How long are we going to sit here looking at lines? But on the 3rd set of lines, something happens. The first participant says what you think is clearly the wrong answer. You chuckle a bit to yourself, wondering if maybe he just misspoke. Then you're surprised because the second person sitting at the table also says the wrong answer. And it's the same wrong answer that the first person said. From where you're sitting, it seems clear that the answer is line A, but they both just said line C. Then the third person goes, and the fourth, and the fifth, and they all say line C too. What the heck is happening? You start to squint a bit and move your head around, wondering if maybe it's the angle of your chair for some reason. But the person sitting next to you just said line C. It's your turn. Time is up. What are you going to say? Would you say what you really think is the right answer? Or would you say what everyone else said? Because you don't want to appear strange. You want to fit in, and you want to please everyone around you. When Solomon Asch did this study, there were 123 participants. They ended up going along with the crowd and saying the wrong answer 36.8% of the time. Another way to look at the results is that at least once during the experiment, 75% of the people in the study yielded to conformity and peer pressure and said the same wrong answer that everyone else provided. Now you have to understand that Asch had set up the experiment with a trick. When each participant showed up to the study room and found the 8 other college students waiting, those 8 other people were actually trained actors. They had been trained to simply pretend to be innocent participants, and they were scripted to give the same wrong answers starting on the 3rd trial of the study to see if the real participants, who were each run one at a time, would go along with the crowd. After the study was over, Asch interviewed each person. He asked them why they went along with the group. In general, he got 2 kinds of responses. A few people reported that they really started to question their visual perception. They decided they must really have some kind of error of judgment. But most people admitted that they knew it was the wrong answer and said it anyway. Why? Because they wanted to please either the other college students in the room or Solomon Asch himself. Some people didn't want to give a different answer from everyone else because they thought it would somehow mess up the experiment, and they didn't want to disappoint the psychologist or let their university down. One person reported that he said the wrong answer to avoid standing out or being different. He said, "I was standing out, a sore thumb. I didn't want particularly to make a fool of myself. They might think I was peculiar." The desire to conform to the crowd, even if we know a behavior is wrong, can be strong. We want to fit in and be accepted. It can lead to our engaging in relatively harmless behaviors, such as fashion choices we regret years later when we look at old photos of ourselves. But it can also lead to much more questionable actions. When we do things we know are wrong to make someone else happy, it can lead to negative consequences for ourselves and for others. While we might never know what we'd do if we were really in a study like Asch's conformity experiment, you can score yourself using another survey. It's simply called the Conformity Scale, and it was published in 1995. The full survey is available online and has 11 items. I'll just give you 5 of them here to give you a general idea. Like the survey we took before, you think about each item and rate how much it applies to you. But this time, you respond to each item on a scale from -4 to +4. -4 means very strong disagreement, while +4 means very strong agreement. You can also answer anywhere in between, like -2 or +2 or 0, right in the middle, which would mean neither agreement nor disagreement. As I read each item, you can write down your answers or keep a running total in your head. Although this total is a bit more complicated because you'll be adding the positive answers and subtracting the negative answers to get your sum at the end. Remember, for all 5 items, you rate them from -4 to +4. So let's start with item number 1. Generally, I'd rather give in and go along for the sake of peace than struggle to have my way. Number 2. Basically, my friends are the ones who decide what we do together. Number 3. A charismatic and eloquent speaker can easily influence and change my ideas. Number 4. I often rely on and act upon the advice of others. Number 5. If someone is very persuasive, I tend to change my opinion and go along with them. Now you can calculate your total sum. If you answered +4 for all of the items, you'd get a sum of +20, meaning a high tendency to conform to others and go along with the crowd. This time, the lowest possible score would be a -20. Both of the personality traits we've discussed so far, sociotropy and the tendency to conform, are based on the idea that people pleasing is fundamentally driven by your desire to have other people like you or to be accepted by the larger group. This is an instinct that almost every human shares. To be honest, the only people who don't show these tendencies at all and have consistently extremely low scores sometimes have disorders that mark them as antisocial criminals who harm other people due to their lack of empathy. So, again, wanting to help others and make them happy isn't a bad thing when done in moderation. It's when it becomes excessive that it starts to become harmful because you become easily manipulated or you never stand up for yourself. But you wouldn't be listening to this course if you didn't know that, which means you've already taken the first step toward changing your life for the better. Let's talk about one more personality trait that might help you understand yourself. Again, let me describe the study and ask you to imagine that you're a participant. This study was done by Leslie Janes and James Olson in the year 2000. You walk into a room where a woman, we'll call her Dr. Janes, greets you. Dr. Janes explains that this experiment is about the relationship between hand-eye coordination and humor. They're going to ask you to watch an amusing video, then move on to a simple ring toss game. For the ring toss, you get 10 chances to get a ring over a pole, and you can stand as close or as far away as you like, making the task relatively easy or hard, while Dr. Janes stands there watching you and recording every shot you take with her clipboard. Now, this was a true experiment, meaning that participants were randomly assigned to be in one of 3 different conditions. The conditions varied based on what kind of video they watched at the start of the study, and it wasn't really about hand-eye coordination. The videos were designed in such a way that they showed a comedian who made jokes, either making fun of himself, jokes making fun of another person, or jokes that simply weren't funny at all. The researchers wanted to know how the people in the condition with the comedian making fun of another person would react. Instead of peer pressure, like Solomon Asch had studied, the researchers in this study were specifically interested in the effects of what they called jeer pressure. They knew that the social jeering, insults, bullying, and nasty teasing that make other people laugh at someone might be some people's worst nightmares. People who might have been bullied in their past, or simply people who are highly empathetic, would respond to this kind of jeer pressure by wanting to do whatever it takes to make everyone around them happy. This condition was the one they were studying in the people who watched the video of the comedian making fun of another person. The researchers hypothesized that the people who watched that video would be set up to feel the need to please others afterwards significantly more compared to the study participants who watched either of the other two videos in the study. So that takes us to the ring toss. Imagine you just saw the video of the comedian making these really mean jokes about another person, and now you're asked to do the ring toss game. You can stand anywhere you want in the room, and the experimenter tells you that she is watching you to see how good you are at the game. Where do you stand? Really close to the pole, making the game easy, or really far away? When Janes and Olson, the experimenters of the study, compared results for the people in the three conditions of this experiment, they found that the participants who had just seen the video of the comedian making fun of someone else showed an interesting pattern that was different from the people in the other two conditions of the experiment. Most of the people in the jeer pressure condition chose to stand right in the middle of the room, not too close to the pole. That wouldn't please the experimenter because it would make the task too easy, but not too far away from the pole either, because that would make the task too hard. They wanted to please the experimenter more than anyone else, so they simply stood right in the middle. Studies like this one get at the heart of empathy as a motivation for people pleasing. Many of us have empathy because we've been hurt in the past. It's a basic human fear that we'll be socially rejected or ostracized. And for some of us, that's because we know how it feels, and that experience haunts us. When psychologists measure the fear of social rejection, they often use a survey that simply asks people to imagine various scenarios and then rate how much each one would cause them concern or anxiety. The scale was published by Geraldine Downey and Scott Feldman in 1996. They found that people who get high scores on the scale expect worse outcomes to happen in their intimate relationships with others, and that those expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies. People's anxieties about relationships cause them to perceive their friends and partners negatively, which leads to bad habits and behaviors, which leads to conflicts and breakups, making their expectations come true. People with high scores tend to be highly jealous, for example, because they assume their partners will eventually leave them for someone else. Their full scale includes 18 different scenarios, which include talking to strangers, friends, family members, and relationship partners. In each scenario, you imagine situations and rate how anxious or concerned that situation would make you, and your expectation of whether that particular circumstance would likely lead to the other person accepting or rejecting you. Like the other surveys I've shared with you in this lecture, I won't go through the entire thing here, but I'll give you 5 examples. Also, they wrote the survey for college students, so not all of the items would apply to people who are not that age or not enrolled at a university. They recommend using a response for each item that ranges from 1 to 6, where 1 means not concerned at all and definitely accepted, to 6 meaning very concerned and definitely rejected. So here we go. Number 1, you ask someone you don't know well out on a date. Number 2, you approach a close friend to talk after doing or saying something that seriously upset them. Number 3, you ask a friend to do you a big favor. Number 4, you go to a party and notice someone on the other side of the room, and then you ask them to dance. Number 5, you ask your current romantic partner if they really love you. As with the other surveys, you can add up your total. This time, the result will range anywhere from 5 to 30. Higher scores mean that you have more anxiety and concern about other people rejecting you in social situations. But it's possible that you are secure with some people in your life and worried about others. These scales have to be broadly used for thousands of people for research purposes, so it's best to know how and when to apply them so they're useful to you, just like how you should use this course. Some parts will apply and some parts won't. The bottom line for this lecture is that it's good to understand and identify which aspects of your personality are driving your people-pleasing behavior. Once we put a name to our thoughts and actions, it's easier to understand them. It's even more useful to trace the origins of why we do something. That kind of insight or epiphany helps us see the root of the problem, starting with childhood experiences we may not have thought about for years. The psychology of personality says that our patterns can be shaped by biological factors like genetics or hormones, by cognitive factors like how we view the world, by our culture, and by our childhood experiences. The next lecture takes a deep dive into the question, why do people feel the need to please others? What is the root cause of the motivation? After we know the answer to that question, we can spend the final 2 lectures focusing on how to change the behaviors into healthier patterns. Lecture 3. Why am I like this? If you're listening to this course, I'm guessing you have the following thoughts about yourself. I'm not good at saying no. I'm too nice, and people take advantage of me all the time. I need to learn how to stand up for myself. I'm not good at handling conflict. I care too much about what other people think. These and similar thoughts are all negatively framed. You're focusing on the bad parts of yourself. In some ways, that's okay, because being honest about your behaviors is the first step toward confronting and changing them. So you deserve praise for that. But the next step is to see the positives in yourself. Most importantly, recognize 2 things. First, others keep coming to you for help, so you must have something valuable to offer. Second, you keep offering help, so you must have benevolent, compassionate intentions. Just from those 2 facts about you, we know you're a good person. But there's a difference between being a good person and a people pleaser. This lecture focuses on possible reasons why you might have become the extreme people pleaser you are. If you don't understand why you do what you do, then it's much harder to change your patterns. It's the basis for therapy. You try to build insight into the causes of fears, anxieties, and negative patterns of behaviors to understand them better. We have to drill down to the root of problems if we want to fix them. If I can get personal for a minute, I'd like to share an example. For about 5 years, I had a recurring nightmare. I'd have this nightmare about once every 2 weeks. I'd wake up from it and ruminate all day, feeling a mixture of sadness, anger, and confusion. Eventually, I spoke to a therapist about it. If I had only talked to her about the sadness, anger, and confusion, I'm sure that would have helped. She might have given me exercises or ways to change my attitude. But the core issue wouldn't have been resolved. I not only had to explain that I was having these nightmares, but we also had to figure out why I was having them in the first place and explore what had started them. We identified that root source, and I talked through the central issue, which was based on a trauma I had experienced years earlier. Once we did that, the nightmares stopped. I can honestly say that I haven't had that dream now for years. I broke the cycle. And in this lecture, I want to help you do the same thing. Importantly, I am not a therapist or any other kind of mental health professional. I'm a research psychologist and professor. So, if thinking about why you might be a people pleaser makes you uncomfortable, if the root causes might be tied to trauma, I highly encourage you to seek out a counselor or therapist. I did it myself, and it was extremely helpful. There's no shame in doing so. It actually requires courage and strength of character to say that you might want to change and grow. And consider what a role model you become to others. Many health insurance plans and HR departments offer at least a few therapy sessions for free, so it's worth checking what coverage you have available to you. But for now, I'm going to discuss 3 possible reasons why you might be a people pleaser. Each reason is going to reach back into your childhood, and none of these reasons is going to blame you for why you do what you do. Hopefully, understanding your past empowers you to reclaim your future. Let's start with possibility number 1. Some people feel the need to say yes, please others, conform to the crowd, avoid attention, and or agree with everyone else because they have been abused and manipulated by a hurtful person in their past. These people have been punished for sticking up for themselves and for saying no. So they've learned that it's easier to avoid pain by saying yes. There's a basic principle in psychology called behaviorism. The core of the principle is that all of our behaviors now are based on our past experiences and whether our choices in the past led to good or bad outcomes. Any behaviors that led to good outcomes or desirable consequences became habitual patterns. We keep performing those actions because we assume we will gain those rewards again. And by the same token, we avoid actions that led to undesirable consequences, assuming those punishments will happen again. We form habits, doing or avoiding the same things over and over, sometimes not even realizing it's become an automatic pattern. The associations might have started so early in our childhood that we don't remember the origin. Essentially, we're sometimes caught in these patterns on a non conscious level. I have a friend who's one of the nicest people I've ever met. She's super polite and kind to everyone she meets. But she also suffers from several physical problems. And I believe we can trace most of these back to stress from being an excessive people pleaser. She has chronic back pain and migraines. She's had a few hernia surgeries. She also takes medication for anxiety. I often ask my friend if she can go to lunch or see a movie with me, and she tells me that she can't because she has to stay at work for a lunch meeting or she's too busy working over the weekend to see a movie. She often agrees to do extra work in the evenings or in the summer for no additional pay or other compensation for her job, even though she's a teacher and she's not on contract. She tells herself and me that she's happy to do all this work, even though I know it means time away from her family and friends. She's often at work until 10 or 11 at night. My friend grew up in an extremely abusive household. Her father left her mother when she was a baby, and her stepfather abused both her and her mother for years. She learned to stay quiet and do whatever he said to avoid his attention. This is a very sad story, but it's unfortunately very common. People of all ages and genders have experiences with people who take advantage of them. and my friend is a survivor. As a child, she learned to cope with a situation out of her control by doing whatever she could to get away from a perpetrator of emotional and physical violence. The scars of that experience have stayed with her, and she acknowledges that her personality has been shaped by her childhood. For some people, the need to please others comes from the kind of deep-seated anxiety caused by this kind of trauma. Early experiences might have taught you that the safe way out of danger was to be quiet, say yes, or agree to someone else's demands. But being abused is never the victim or survivor's fault. The problem is that now these patterns have embedded themselves so deeply in your personality that they might be leading to negative outcomes that don't need to happen. My friend continues to say yes to every request because she feels the need to be everyone's best friend, to be the best employee. She doesn't realize that she's surrounded by people who love her for who she is. She doesn't have to work so much that it causes her physical harm. She's allowed to say no, and so are you. Possibility number 2 is an idea called attachment theory. Attachment theory is one of the most popular ideas in developmental and social psychology to explain how children respond to their parents and how adult romantic relationship partners act toward each other. It's a hypothesis based on our bond with the first primary caregiver in our life. Just like a baby duck or goose imprints on its mother after hatching, we attach to our parent as an infant. According to attachment theory, that primary attachment serves as a starting point for all future relationships in our life. That means that it's a psychological home base for us. We then explore other relationships, but that first relationship will always serve as the model for future interactions. No matter what, our initial imprinting during infancy and early childhood will always be the starting point. Attachment theory was initially created by a child psychologist named John Bowlby. He was born in England in 1907 and lived through both world wars. He worked with children who had been separated from their parents and were now emotionally disturbed. Bowlby wrote about 2 children who had a particular influence on his theory. He described one child as being emotionally shut down. This teenager appeared to have all of his defenses up, letting no one in, pushing everyone away from him. He didn't want any friends or social connections, and Bowlby thought that was probably so that he couldn't get hurt again. That strategy makes a lot of sense. It protects you, like figurative armor. But there was another child who took almost the opposite approach to people. This child was younger, about age 7. When Bowlby would visit the group home where the children lived, this little boy would desperately cling to him, following him everywhere. Bowlby said this little boy wanted love and attention and wanted to please Bowlby simply to get a bit of love. He appeared to be lonely and seeking validation because his parents weren't offering it. Bowlby developed the idea that there are 3 basic attachment styles. The healthiest attachment style is called secure. This comes from parents who raise children within a consistently happy environment. These children learn to have positive self-esteem and trust others, so their adult relationships are stable. The second attachment style is what Bowlby saw in the older teenage child. He called that personality avoidant. Avoidant people are raised by consistently bad parents. These parents are abusive, neglectful, or absent. I know in the earlier part of this lecture, we talked about how abusive childhoods can sometimes lead to adults who feel the need to people please. Now I'm saying that abuse leads to a different outcome in adulthood. The results of abuse are complicated, and a lot of factors will influence exactly how they affect someone. Abuse or aggression during childhood can unfortunately come in a really wide variety of forms. It can come from many different people, and it can be direct or indirect, such as neglect or manipulation. So, it is a common coping mechanism to simply build psychological walls toward emotions and toward other people, as Bowlby describes. But this kind of personality doesn't lead to the need to please others. It's the third kind of attachment style that ties into people pleasing. The third attachment style Bowlby suggested is called anxious ambivalent. He said that this kind of social interaction is the result of a childhood in which you're never really sure how your parents or other important people in your life are going to respond to your needs. Sometimes they are there for you, and sometimes they're not. Maybe sometimes your parents were wonderful, loving, and sweet, but at other times, surprisingly harsh or inattentive. It's the nature of this inconsistency that builds your need to please them, because each time you talk with them, it's a bit of a gamble what outcome you'll get. This unpredictable situation leads to anxiety. Research studies done after Bowlby's original pioneering work showed that our attachment style can come from our parents or be influenced by relationships later in our lives. This means that if you now have that third anxious ambivalent or people pleasing attachment style, it might be the result of important people at any stage of your development up until now. If you had any relationships you found unpredictable, where sometimes you were rewarded and gratified, but sometimes you were met with neglect or abuse, it might have left you unsure of yourself. In romantic relationships, anxious ambivalent people tend to be more jealous of their romantic partner because they're never sure if their partner really loves them or is going to commit to them long term. At work, anxious ambivalent people feel the need to work extra hours, to volunteer for committees, or be the employee of the month because they need to prove how happy and excited they are to be there. At school, anxious ambivalent people need to get the best grades and please the teacher. Anxious ambivalent people have low self esteem, though, and their anxiety can sometimes make them overly controlling of the loved ones in their life. Remember that in Lecture 2, we talked about two social motivations called autonomy and sociotropy. Autonomy is the need to be independent, whereas sociotropy is the need to be liked and accepted by others. Our personality can be driven by the balance between these two motives, or the imbalance if one or the other is more important to us. A research study conducted in Spain and published in 2009 asked 164 people to complete a questionnaire measuring a variety of aspects of their lives. The results showed that people who got high scores on the measure of autonomy also got high scores on a survey that measured their level of avoidant attachment style. This makes sense. Their social independence and defense mechanisms mean they would rather protect themselves from being hurt by not being vulnerable. The study also found that people who got high scores on the measure of sociotropy also tended to get high scores on a measure of anxious ambivalent attachment style. In other words, anxious ambivalent attachment and sociotropy are positively correlated. Both indicate the desire to please other people, to seek validation and approval, to be accepted by the group, and to fit in. Very similar patterns were replicated in another study done by different researchers in Japan with 500 participants. And further research has found even more evidence for this general pattern. There's a third reason you might be motivated to please people that could go all the way back to your childhood. And this one has nothing to do with your family. Maybe you were raised in a loving home with reliable and consistent caregivers who were always there for you. Neither of the theories we've covered so far would explain your driving need to seek approval. So I find this next theory really intriguing because I think it applies to thousands, if not millions, of people. In fact, I believe this theory is important to almost everyone, regardless of demographics, personal history, or culture. The idea is called self-discrepancy theory. It was first developed in the 1980s by a psychologist named E. Torrey Higgins. Higgins started with the basic idea of a self-concept, which most psychologists define as our overall assessment of who we are right now, including both the good and bad aspects of ourselves. In self-discrepancy theory, Higgins expanded that idea by suggesting that instead of a single self-concept, all of us actually have three simultaneous self-concepts at any given time. The first self-concept is what he calls our actual self. That's the same thing as a normal self-concept. It's just who we already are right now. But Higgins adds the idea of an ideal self. Your ideal self is the person you'd like to be. It's the person you wish you were right now, or the person you'd like to become in the future if all your goals and dreams were fulfilled. If you could have the perfect job and change your personality to maximize the best parts of yourself and pursue your talents and hobbies and have the happiest relationships with friends and family and your life partner, that's your ideal self. Importantly, the ideal self is based on your personal goals. It's what would authentically make you personally happy. That's different from the third self in Higgins' theory. That self is called the ought self. The ought self is a self-concept you create that's a vision of the person you would be if you fulfilled the goals and wishes of the other people in your life, the person they would want you to be. Essentially, the ideal self is the person you'd love to be, while the ought self is the person you feel like you should be to get other people to love you. When I teach this concept in my college classes, I ask my students, did you choose your major based on what makes you happy or what your parents wanted for you? If you chose something for yourself, you're fulfilling your ideal self. If you chose something because of family pressure, you're fulfilling your ought self. The ought self is the person you think your family, your partner, your friends, your boss, your neighbors, your religion, and your culture want you to be. Every culture around the world has social norms that shape us using peer pressure regarding what's considered acceptable, attractive, polite, and so on. This pressure from the outside world of how to look, how to act, and who to be is the ought self. Higgins did a series of studies showing that when our actual self doesn't match either our ideal or our ought self, we have negative emotions. That's why he called his idea self-discrepancy theory, because discrepancies among these three selves lead to depression and anxiety. But what's relevant to this course is that particular types of discrepancy lead to certain outcomes. When we don't live up to our ideal self, the kinds of outcomes we experience are sadness and dejection. In other words, we're a little depressed and disappointed when we don't meet our personal hopes and dreams. However, Higgins found that when we feel like we're not matching up with our ought self, we feel anxiety, guilt, and shame. When we start to worry that our ought self is failing, when we think other people are judging us and we're being evaluated negatively, we feel agitated. This agitation lowers self-esteem, which leads to loss of confidence and negative interactions within our personal relationships and at work. All this negativity and lack of belief in ourselves motivates us to please everyone around us, to make them happy and regain their acceptance. We need reassurance that we are lovable. Since Higgins originally published his theory, hundreds of studies have found support for his ideas from a wide variety of populations all over the world. So here's the really important question that Higgins' theory raises. If a discrepancy between your actual self and your ought self causes anxiety, then wouldn't pursuing your ought self decrease your anxiety? In other words, if you could just live up to what other people want for you and please them, wouldn't you be happy? That's the emotional promise that perpetual people pleasers are constantly striving for. That's the goal they're trying to achieve. But it's simply not a healthy goal. Has it worked for you yet? Are you happy and healthy? The answer must be no, or you wouldn't be listening to this course. It didn't work for the friend I described to you earlier in this lecture, who found herself staying late at work every night, away from her family, and going to the doctor for repeated surgeries. But why not? Doesn't the research say that the discrepancy is the problem? Think about the issue from a different angle. Every dollar or minute you spend pursuing your ought self is a dollar or minute you didn't spend pursuing your ideal self. You have a finite amount of money and time. It's like sitting down at a roulette wheel and splitting your money in half, betting half on red and half on black. You won't get anywhere with that strategy. Or if you get to a fork in the road and you can't figure out which path to take, you end up stalled and going nowhere. In fact, it's worse to go in the direction that you know someone else picked for you, the path that won't make you happy. That path takes you farther and farther away from the authentic, ideal self you wanted to become. If you're living your entire life to please other people, but you never please yourself, eventually you might become someone who is well-loved, popular, employee of the year, but someone who has sacrificed their own authentic sense of self. And that's the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, people will abuse and manipulate your good intentions, keeping you under their thumb because they know you will help them become popular and employee of the year. Just because you feel like you ought to. That's the ought self whispering in your mind. Let me explain one more set of research studies that I think make this point. Two psychologists named McClellan Stanley and Anthony Burrow published their research in 2015. Across 4 different studies, they asked research participants to rate their own personalities based on their actual current selves first, then to rate their personalities based on what they would ideally like to be. In the 4th study, they also asked the participants to describe the difference between who they were right then and who they felt obligated to be. In other words, their ought self. In all 4 studies, they also asked participants to complete a survey measuring well-being and purpose in life. This survey, called the RIF scale and published in 1989, has 9 items that assess how much someone has crystallized their sense of direction and intentionality. High scores on these items mean that people have set goals, found their passion, and are well on their way to achieving their dreams. All 4 of the studies in this series of psychological investigations showed that people who had larger discrepancies between their current actual selves and either their ideal or ought selves had less purpose in life. Importantly, in the 4th and final study, this diminished sense of purpose and drive was also found to be tied to participants reporting a significant loss of personal agency. That means that they felt they had lost control over their own thoughts, motivations, and actions, and that all of these parts of their lives were being controlled by other people. In short, they were living for other people instead of living for themselves. They were people pleasers. How much has pleasing others affected your own ability to pursue your hopes and dreams or your purpose in life? I want to end this lecture by giving you a modified version of the same scale that was used in the study I just described, the one that measures purpose in life. I'm modifying it to make it easier to use for our purposes. In scientific research, scales like this often deliberately word items in ways that are just slightly confusing to make sure the participants are really paying attention. But you're listening to this lecture without being able to see it written down, so I'm going to simplify the items a little. There are also 9 items in the full scale, and as in the previous lecture, I'll just present 5 of them here. For each, respond this time on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 means you fully disagree and 10 means you fully agree. At the end, just calculate your total sum. Number 1, I focus on the future, and the present almost never brings me problems. Number 2, I set goals for myself, and they never seem like a waste of time. Number 3, I am an active person in carrying out the plans I set for myself. Number 4, my daily activities are satisfying and important to me personally. Number 5, some people wander aimlessly through life, but I am not one of them. Hopefully, you got a high score. The maximum for our modified version of this survey is a 50. If you did, great job. You're already on the way toward achieving your ideal self, and you should feel really encouraged about that. I'm guessing that part of your ideal self is decreasing the amount of people-pleasing that you do, or that you're listening to this course because you want to help a loved one be able to set healthy boundaries. Either way, what you've already achieved is admirable. And if you got a lower score, don't despair. The fact that you're taking the time to listen to this course means that you've purchased the figurative compass you need to realign your psychological GPS. You now know which path is the right path. You can switch from working toward the ought self to the ideal self. So, whether your tendencies are emotional scars because of childhood traumas, a response to an unpredictable childhood, or simply social pressure and your desire to be the person you think you should be to make other people happy instead of prioritizing yourself, you've recognized the pattern and are working toward being a healthier, happier self. In the next lecture, we'll keep that momentum going by diving into the psychology behind why prioritizing yourself is not selfish. In fact, it won't just help you, it will make everyone around you happier and healthier too. Lecture 4, Prioritizing Me. If you've gotten this far in the course, hopefully you've achieved some insight into what kind of people pleaser you are and why you have those recurring thoughts, emotions, or behaviors. In this lecture and the next, we want to focus on how to change your patterns. To do that, I'm going to present you with several specific exercises to try. As I've said before, it's completely up to you whether you think these will work for you personally. We're all different, and you shouldn't waste your valuable time doing things just to please me, right? But I also encourage you not to avoid something just because it might seem uncomfortable at first. We all sometimes need to confront our fears if we want to change our patterns. A major emphasis in this lecture is that prioritizing our own needs is healthy, and that self-care is not selfish. The term self-care has become a popular buzzword in the last decade or so, but it really is meaningful. It refers to actions taken to protect your mental and physical health. And these may include eating right, exercising, making time for friends and family, talking with a therapist or counselor, getting enough sleep, distancing yourself from toxic people or situations, or anything else that helps you stay grounded and peaceful. The first conference for the International Center for Self-Care Research was held in Rome, Italy, in the summer of 2019. During the conference, the scholars who attended the meeting identified reasons why people seem to struggle with committing to consistent self-care. Some reasons were lack of motivation to change, psychological attachment to unhealthy patterns or people, and practical things like stressful life events getting in the way of being able to stop and reassess what people really wanted for their future. The conference also produced a list of interventions that might help people improve their self-care patterns. I want to highlight 3 of those interventions that I think are particularly relevant to this course. First, they noted that people are better able to pursue self-care when they have the right motivation. By listening to this course, I think you've shown you have that motivation. Second, they said that self-care is better sustained when people are surrounded by supportive friends, coworkers, and family members. I encourage you to think about which people in your life are really helpful in this regard and whom you can use as an accountability partner. I also encourage you to ask if there are people in your life who might not be treating you respectfully and to consider whether they deserve your friendship. Finally, the conference attendees noted that improved self-care is more likely to occur when people have information about interventions, tools, and skills that are specifically tailored to help them change their habits. I hope this course does that for you. With that in mind, the rest of this lecture provides 8 exercises. I designed these to be simple, free, and based on psychology research studies. Exercise 1. Why did you choose to listen to this course? To start, I'd like you to simply write a few sentences identifying what your major challenges are and what your major goal is. It's sort of like a personal mission statement. Putting your challenges and goals into words helps you acknowledge them and increase your commitment to them later. This is often the first step to real change. The second exercise I'd like you to try is based on the research I shared in Lecture 3. Remember that we talked about an idea called self-discrepancy theory. It suggests that we all have 3 identities: our actual self, our ought self, and our ideal self. When we spend our lives trying to live up to what other people want us to be, our ought self, we might avoid anxiety, but we never feel real personal fulfillment. Instead, research shows that it's better to pursue our ideal self, the authentic future self that will truly make us happy. So for exercise 2, I'd like you to think of something you've accomplished in your past that was really, really hard. It should be something that took years to get done, where you had to save money for a really long time, or spend hours practicing something, or use an incredible amount of willpower. This might even be something that doesn't have a finite endpoint, something you're still working on, where improvement is continual. Maybe you started learning a new language, where you continue to get better, or you learned how to play a musical instrument, or you sing in a choir, where you've learned dozens of songs, or you've traveled to many different states or countries. Note, I want you to pick something you accomplished that was important to you personally, not something that you pursued because it was important to someone else. It should be something that's part of your ideal self. Once you've identified something amazing that you've accomplished, there are additional parts of this exercise. Try to identify a particular challenge you encountered along the way that you had to overcome to achieve your goal. Really think about how difficult this barrier was and the steps you took to get through it. Then think about the sense of accomplishment that you had or still have when you realize how wonderful it is that you've been able to do this incredible thing. Congratulate yourself. Be proud of yourself. Finally, realize that the bravery, patience, and tenacity it took to accomplish that goal are all part of you. Those characteristics are part of your identity. This matters because changing your people-pleasing ways might not be easy, and it might not happen overnight. So if you stumble and encounter barriers and challenges, I want you to not give up. Remember that you have overcome similar barriers before, and that the tenacity you showed was worth it. You can do it again, and pursuing this part of your ideal self will pay off. Patience, confidence in yourself, and tenacity in working toward a goal are the keys to the third exercise I want you to try. But before I describe the exercise, let me share another research idea with you that hasn't come up previously in this course. It's a very popular theory in psychology and in the world of education, which comes from Dr. Carol Dweck. It's the theory that you can have two different approaches or mindsets when it comes to learning any new task. A fixed mindset is the belief that you will be naturally good at some things and simply bad at other things, no matter how hard you try. This is what teachers often hear when students say, "I'm just not a math person," or "I can't draw to save my life." People with a fixed mindset might try something once, and if they're not immediately good at it, they tend to just give up. On the other hand, a growth mindset is the belief that you can grow and improve in any task with enough practice and hard work. With a growth mindset, even failure means that you've learned something. And in fact, sometimes failing at a task teaches us more than succeeding. We know that people can improve at skills like math and drawing with practice, for example, and other parts of us can change as well. One study published in 2021 asked over 1,000 young adults in Germany to fill out personality tests right before graduating from school and moving away from home, and then again after living on their own for about a year. For participants in the study who had a fixed mindset, their personality scores didn't change much over that year period. But for the participants who had a growth mindset, moving away from home, starting a new job, meeting new people, and engaging in opportunities during this new chapter of their lives were associated with changes in their personality. This study is important because it reminds us that our attitude about change influences whether we are capable of change. If you want to stop being a people pleaser, you have to have a growth mindset about yourself. So, for the third exercise, I'd like you to identify 3 or 4 things you often tell yourself you're not good at doing when it comes to people pleasing. These should be things you find to be frequent struggles. The start of each sentence should be the 4 words, "I'm not good at." Examples might be, "I'm not good at setting healthy boundaries." "I'm not good at saying no to people." "I'm not good at standing up for myself." I'm not good at politely disagreeing with my friends. I'm not good at expressing my opinion when I think it will be unpopular. I'm not good at telling my boss or my romantic partner when I'm upset or unappreciated. The point of this exercise is to practice switching from a fixed to a growth mindset. So I want you to go back to each thought, each struggle, and we're going to change the end of the sentence by adding one word. That word is yet. Just by adding this single word, we take thoughts that seemed pessimistic, absolute, and fixed, and we turn them into optimistic growth opportunities. For example, now you can think, I'm not good at setting healthy boundaries yet. I'm not good at saying no to people yet. I'm not good at standing up for myself yet, and so on. Eventually, we need to get to a place where you have made some movement on these goals. So, as you start to practice your skills, hopefully the sentences shift. For the final step of this exercise, the sentences will now be in past tense, showing the growth that you have made. Now, the sentences might be I wasn't good at setting healthy boundaries. I wasn't good at saying no. I wasn't good at standing up for myself. This exercise emphasizes that growth is possible, and it helps us keep a positive and optimistic attitude about reaching long-term goals. Lecture 3 also talked about the principle of behaviorism. Remember that behaviorism is the idea that everything we do is because we hope to either gain a reward or avoid a punishment. In other words, you might be engaging in people-pleasing habits because at some point in your past, you learned that making other people happy got you praise or attention, and you liked that feeling. Alternatively, disappointing someone got you negative attention, and that felt like a punishment. So you now try to avoid repeating that feeling. So the next two exercises are designed with behaviorism in mind. The first one is based on the idea of punishment. Of course, I'm not going to suggest that you add any kind of punishment to your life. We already live with enough negativity, and I want your life to get better, not worse. Also, plenty of research studies show that we're more motivated by rewards than by punishments. So that's not what this exercise is about. Instead, exercise 4 is about shifting your focus on which punishments that already exist in your life are salient in your mind. Here's what I mean. Many people pleasers engage in their behaviors because they are worried about the social punishments of not making others happy. So they keep saying yes to every request to avoid theoretical punishments they're afraid they might encounter if they say no. So for exercise 4, I want you to realize that instead of saying yes to avoid phantom fears that might happen, you're saying yes and allowing real punishments to happen. I want you to sit down and list all the negative outcomes, consequences, or effects that constantly pleasing other people is already having on your life. Is it draining your bank account, making you physically exhausted, lowering your self-esteem, making your schedule so full you never have free time, taking time away from loved ones, making you hate your job, causing you to resent someone you love or used to admire, leading to physical issues such as headaches, ulcers, or chronic pain? All of the above, or other side effects I haven't even mentioned? Writing down these negative effects should help you realize that your behaviors are leading to punishments that you might not have consciously connected to your actions. Now that you've connected those dots, the psychology of behaviorism predicts that it should be easier for you to change your behaviors because you will realize that you are being punished for these behaviors. The flip side of behaviorism is that you should be motivated to engage in actions that are likely to lead to rewards. So, for exercise 5, I want you to explicitly consider what rewards you might get to experience if you stopped pleasing other people, started saying no, and established healthy boundaries. Think of something you love doing, but rarely find time to do. It might be sitting alone, reading a book for pleasure. Maybe it's taking a walk, watching a TV show, calling an old friend, or playing a musical instrument. Now, this exercise is one that I want you to repeat over several days. For the first few days, you can just remind yourself of how much you enjoyed doing this and fantasize about how great it would be to make time to do it again. And then I want you to take the next step. For the next week or so, each day, set aside a minimum of 10 minutes for your chosen activity. Seriously, 10 minutes is the bare minimum, and everyone should be able to do that. The trick is that this is now an official part of your calendar. It's an obligation, a commitment. You can even call it a meeting if you want, or whatever term you want to use that feels honest. Heck, I'm a doctor, so if you want, you can even say a doctor told you to do it. Remember, you should make this time for yourself every day. And I want you to try doing two things with it. First, slowly and incrementally increase the amount of time you allow yourself to spend doing this activity until you reach a final goal. Maybe you start with only 10 minutes a day, but your end goal is to give yourself a full hour each day. Your second task is to ensure that this time is sacred, meaning that no one else can steal it from you. If someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, you can now legitimately tell them you can't do that thing because you have a previous obligation. And you can feel okay about that because you really do have an obligation to take care of yourself by prioritizing your physical and mental health needs. Remember, self-care matters. If this exercise is making you uncomfortable for any reason, or if you feel like it simply isn't realistic for you right now, let me offer you a slightly modified version. Think of a larger reward for yourself you'd find particularly motivating, such as a gift you'd like to buy for yourself or an activity you really enjoy, but that simply isn't an everyday kind of thing, like a spa day or a vacation. Set a goal where you reward yourself with this treat if you can successfully stand up to other people's demands a certain realistic amount of time. Maybe it's 5 or 10 times when you say no or maintain a healthy boundary. The point of this exercise is to identify things in your life that will provide self-care rewards, and then allow yourself the space to enjoy them guilt-free. Something that has inspired me personally is what I call the 1-1-1 rule. Allow yourself 1 hour each day, 1 day each week, and 1 week each year for self-care. We all deserve it. The 1-1-1 rule may seem like a goal that's out of reach for you, and it's okay if that's true. I fully admit that I don't always live up to this goal myself. 1 full day every week of self-care is unrealistic for me during most of the school year when I have papers to grade and books to write. But the closer we can get to our goals, the better. And goals set the scene for the next exercise I'd like you to try. Psychology offers another theory called regulatory focus. Essentially, this is the idea that we all live with two kinds of goals in life. Imagine you're single and unemployed. One way to frame your goals in life might be to think, I just don't want to be so lonely and broke anymore. If that's the way you're framing your mindset, you're thinking about what you don't want, not being lonely and broke. And it's called a prevention goal. Alternatively, you can think about the same situation, but in a very different way if you frame your goals from a new perspective. Instead, you could say to yourself, I want to be in a happy relationship and find my dream job. This time, you're imagining what you want instead of what you don't want, and it's called a promotion goal. On the surface, it seems like the two mindsets might lead to the same thing. Both might get you to download a dating app on your phone and send your resume out to potential employers. But the research studies show that when people think in terms of promotion goals, their outcomes are much more likely to be successful. Motivation is higher, mood is better, persistence is stronger, and people use more effective strategies when they think in terms of what they want instead of what they don't want. One way to summarize this research is that people are happier and healthier when they're not living their life based on fear. So, for exercise 6, I'd like you to try writing down 5 to 10 specific goals you have for yourself. Try to be as detailed as possible and focus on the next 6 months to a year of your life. After you've written your goals, go back and look at them and analyze whether they are framed as prevention or as promotion goals. Are they written as things you are trying to avoid or as things you want to achieve? If you wrote down anything that counts as a prevention goal, try rephrasing it as a promotion goal instead. See if the same goal is more inspiring with a new outlook. Before I explain exercise 7, I want you to know that it's going to focus on how you approach conflict with important people in your life. If you're a perpetual people pleaser, you probably avoid conflict. There are several psychological models that try to explain conflict styles or tactics by breaking them down into various approaches or strategies. One of the most popular was created in 1974 by Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman, and today it's both used in professional business settings and applied to how couples in romantic relationships argue. In the Thomas Kilman model of conflict, there are 5 basic ways you can deal with disagreement between two parties. Competing means you do whatever it takes to win. This is probably the opposite of what you're doing if you're a high people pleaser. The flip side of competing is accommodating, which is when people almost immediately give up their own needs to satisfy the other person. It's like accepting the first salary offered to you when you get a new job, or going to whatever restaurant is your partner's favorite, even if you don't like the food there, because you know it will make them happy. But there are 3 other options in the model. A third option is called avoiding. As you can guess from the name, avoiding means trying to ignore the fact that there's a conflict in the first place. This might be trying to put off the decision or fight until later by not talking about it, trying to dodge the other person, or hoping they will just give up. Next, there's compromising. This is seeking a middle ground. Compromising works great if it's possible. In traditional negotiations, such as a salary discussion, you might end up meeting in the middle, or you and your partner might alternate where you go out to eat each week. Compromise is fine, but it's not actually the best solution out of the 5 options. Finally, the 5th conflict style in the Thomas Kilman model is called collaborating. Collaborating is when you're assertive, but not aggressive. It occurs when both people involved in a conflict actively seek a mutually agreeable and beneficial solution that might not be obvious at the start of the disagreement. It's not the same as a compromise because sometimes it requires a creative outcome. For example, maybe you and your partner are trying to decide what to do for dinner. Neither one of you feels like cooking, but at the same time, you're feeling uninspired about your restaurant choices. Your partner likes to go to the same 3 or 4 places repeatedly, and it's the same for you, and for some reason on this particular evening, neither one of you is in the mood for the other person's preferences. Instead of either of you giving in or deciding to alternate, the collaboration approach is to find a creative solution that still solves the problem. In this case, maybe you go to the grocery store and get the supplies for an easy picnic in the park. At least 2 research studies conducted by psychologists found that couples who used collaboration to work out their differences report higher relationship satisfaction. And several studies have examined how the Thomas Kilmann model explains happy or sad employees in various professional settings and contexts. In short, your mindset when you think about conflict matters. Giving up right away isn't the best solution, and neither is being aggressive and always wanting to win. While compromise works sometimes, creative solutions that make both people happy is ideal. So here's exercise 7. Try to remember a few times in the last year or two when you've chosen to resolve a conflict by avoiding it, by simply giving in to what the other person wanted, or even by finding a compromise. Then imagine how the conflict might have been resolved in a slightly better way if you had brainstormed a different solution through that 5th strategy of collaboration. We know that the moment has passed and you can't go back in time, but working through a different hypothetical solution now can serve as practice for the next time a similar solution comes up in the future. It's like exercise for your conflict muscles. Compromise and collaboration are good ideas when you're working with your boss, your friends, your family, or your romantic partner, and you want to maintain these long-term relationships. In other words, if those people really love you and they're not abusing you, then it's worth it for you to find ways to maintain boundaries without necessarily resorting to a hard no. But at other times in your life, with other people, a hard no might be appropriate. That might be salespeople, random strangers, or people who have a history of manipulating you unfairly. So, the last exercise in this lecture is kind of like a warm up to the final lecture in the course, where we'll discuss specific research, tips, and strategies to change your behaviors. With that preview in mind, consider exercise 8. Think of several times in your life when you said yes, when you would have preferred to say no, failed to maintain a boundary, or didn't speak up for yourself and regretted it later. If you can, actually sit down and make a table with rows and 4 columns. The rows are for the occasions, so make as many rows as you need. The 4 columns are for specific aspects or details of each occasion. In the first column of each row, write the details of who was involved. In the second column, identify where it happened. In the third column, write down what exactly you did or didn't do that you regretted. Finally, in the last column, write down how it made you feel or what the consequences were. Once you have several rows filled out, try to identify any patterns that appear. If certain people appear frequently in that first column, that's important to realize. Those are your problem people. They're the ones who keep pushing past your boundaries. Maybe they are not respecting your needs, or they're the ones you're the most afraid of displeasing. If you tend to give in more at certain locations, that's also useful information. Maybe you're more of a people pleaser at work, or when you're not in the comfort of your own home, or when you're in a location that has some psychological meaning from your past. The third column might provide some insight into the kinds of scenarios that lead you to be the most vulnerable. And the last column is a reminder of the harm that your behaviors are causing in your life. While these are negative, to be sure, the goal of this entire course is to be optimistic that we're going to change those outcomes. Again, you've already taken the first step in doing that by making it this far in the course. So join me for the final lecture, where we'll try to break out of these patterns by going over specific tools and techniques to change your habits. Hopefully, these ideas serve as figurative keys to unlock the potential you have to find a better future. Lecture 5: How to Say No Politely. People pleasing doesn't have to be a life sentence. With the right tools, tips, and hacks, anyone's behavior and habits can change from surviving to thriving. In this final lecture, that's what I hope we can achieve, or at least start to do for you. We've talked about a lot of research studies and theories regarding what kind of people pleaser you might be, personality traits that make up aspects of these patterns, and possible origins for the associated thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Now, let's focus on practical ways you can actually change how you respond when people ask you to do something you don't want to do. The first step in this process might be to give you a bit of inspiration in the form of a role model. For me, the perfect person for this job is world-class gymnast Simone Biles. On July 28th, 2021, the New York Times sports section ran the headline, "Simone Biles and the Power of No." Other news outlets ran similar stories around the same time, all explaining how an important transformation had occurred in the public reaction to the decision Biles had made to not compete in the Olympics. Let me back up in case you're not familiar with the story. Simone Biles is one of the most accomplished athletes in the world. As a gymnast, she had already won 30 medals at previous Olympics or World Championships by the time she got to the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. She had dedicated her entire life to honing her craft. She had sacrificed other hobbies, time with friends and family, comfort foods, and everything else it cost to be at the top of a field as competitive as international gymnastics. Biles was part of the U.S. team at the Tokyo Olympics, which was the favorite to win the gold medal in her event. Her teammates were all counting on her. In short, she had a lot of people to please. She acknowledged this pressure on Instagram, writing, "I truly do feel like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders at times." When she got to Tokyo, she was 24 years old. She had already shown signs of psychological strength. She spoke up publicly against racism and was willing to go on record about the sexual abuse that she and other athletes had suffered at the hands of their team doctor, a breach of trust that damaged the mental health of several young women in her field. She traveled with her team to the Olympics in Japan that year and competed in some of the events. And then, experiencing a severe mental block that could have put her in danger, she chose to say no to the women's team final event. She decided not to please anyone except herself. It wasn't an easy decision. She cried as she told reporters that she was withdrawing. But she explains to them, "I have to focus on my mental health and not jeopardize my health and well-being." Many observers immediately accused Biles of being selfish, using words like quitter. The Deputy Attorney General of Legal Strategy in Texas, where Biles is originally from, tweeted that she was selfish, childish, and a national embarrassment. Her team members encouraged her to keep competing, but she stood strong. The U.S. team won the silver medal, while Biles supported them from the sidelines. Afterward, she opened up about how therapy helped her work through her psychological anxiety. The key to this entire story is that the world's response to Biles shifted in a way that makes me feel so happy and proud. A few weeks after the initial incident, members of the public began to stop expressing disappointment and stigma and started to praise her decision. The mental health charity Mind tweeted, "Simone is a role model. She deserves our applause, respect, appreciation, and above all, our support right now." That same Texas deputy attorney deleted his tweet, apologized, and admitted that he had absolutely no qualifications to judge her decision. He added that Biles is a true patriot and one of the greatest gymnasts of our time. The International Olympic Committee even eventually published a statement in support of her decision. Their official spokesperson, Mark Adams, stated, "We have huge respect and support for her." In interviews later, Biles noted, "It's okay sometimes to even sit out the big competitions to focus on yourself because it shows how strong of a competitor and person that you really are rather than just battle through it." She also said, "This Olympic Games, I wanted it to be for myself. I came in and I felt like I was still doing it for other people." When she was asked if she would change anything, she said, "Everybody asks, if you could go back, would you? No, I wouldn't change anything because everything happens for a reason. And I learned a lot about myself: courage, resilience, how to say no, and speak up for yourself." That's what I want for you. At first, people might not react positively if you say no and stand up for yourself. People might be surprised, and they might even call you selfish. But remember, it's not selfish for you to prioritize yourself, avoid being manipulated, and maintain healthy boundaries. Again, we all have to make some compromises and be willing to cooperate with others. But you don't have to sacrifice your mental and physical health to please other people. If Simone Biles doesn't work as a role model for you personally, think of someone else you know who has stood up to the pressure of others and come out the other side with self-respect and conviction. Now imagine how wonderful it would be for you to be that example for someone in your life. I promised you that in this final lecture, I was going to give you practical tips and tricks on how to stop people pleasing. So let's get to it. I've put together 7 specific strategies that are flexible enough to work in a very wide variety of settings and with many different kinds of people. You can adapt them however works for you. And hopefully, there are enough techniques on the list that you can pick and choose depending on your personal comfort levels and what works with the situation, person, or type of relationship involved. To help you remember the techniques when you need them, I've also come up with a mnemonic device. Everyone has heard of the planet's 7 seas, referring to the bodies of water. If you can get good at the strategies we're about to cover, I'm going to say that you will be sailing through the 7 seas. Now, this is an audio course, so I need to explain that when I say 7 seas, I'm actually referring to the letter C instead of the body of water, because each of the 7 techniques I'm about to discuss with you starts with the letter C. The point is that when you're in the middle of a situation, When someone has just asked you to do something you don't want to do, you might panic. You only have a few seconds to figure out a strategy to politely say no. So you have to think really quickly, almost like an improv actor. If you remember any or all of the 7 C's on this list, it might help you. So I encourage you to write them down, go over them repeatedly, practice them, and have them readily accessible in your mind. The mnemonic device will help you at first, but the goal is that these will become more and more automatic over time, and you won't even need to think about them explicitly because they will become your new normal. Let's start with the first C, which stands for calendar. By calendar, I mean that when someone asks you to do something, a polite and completely reasonable response is to say, I'm not sure if I'm available to do that. I'll have to check my calendar and get back to you. A follow up might be to ask the person when they need your decision or response. If the other person tries to pressure you into answering immediately, ask them why there's such a rush. If they don't have a legitimate reason, it's a bad sign that maybe they're simply trying to take advantage of you. In this situation, when they really are insisting on an answer, one strategy is to simply say, hold on for just a minute, or even, I'm sorry, I have to run to the bathroom, but I'll be right back, or something similar that you're comfortable with. Just buying a few minutes allows you to process your emotions and collect your thoughts about what you really want to do. You're being respectful to the other people in your life by making sure you don't double book yourself. At the same time, you're avoiding having to make an immediate commitment to something you may not want to do. But remember, it really is polite to make sure you get back to the person who asked you. Don't simply avoid them forever. There's one more aspect of the C stands for calendar strategy I want to mention before we move forward. People often try to manipulate you by getting you to commit your time before you even know what you'll be doing. Their strategy might be asking you something like, what are you doing this weekend? Unless they're simply making small talk or potentially asking you out on a date, they might be gearing up to ask you for a favor, like helping them move heavy furniture from one apartment to another. So, if someone asks you a vague question like that, remember the first of the 7 C's and try responding, I'm not sure. I'll have to check my calendar. Why do you ask? That way, you can find out what they want, and you can truly decide whether you consent before you commit. The second C I want you to remember from sailing through the 7 C's stands for capacity. If someone asks you to do something burdensome, such as loaning them money you don't have, or a favor that will take a lot of time, or similar, a polite way you can say no is to tell them you don't have the capacity at this time. We all have a limited capacity of money, time, and mental space. And if the people in your life really love and respect you, they will understand when you have to set aside those resources for certain things that really need your attention. In other words, you can say, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to help you with that. Right now, I really just have to prioritize my blank. Fill in the word blank honestly and sincerely. Maybe you need to prioritize your family, your health, your work life balance, your privacy, a relationship, or other obligations. You are also allowed to literally say other obligations and leave it deliberately vague. Your life is not other people's business. Again, if they push you, they are trying to go over your boundary. You're allowed to be firm, repeat yourself, and just say that you can't elaborate because there are some privacy issues involved. In the past, I've been in situations that might have turned awkward when people have not accepted my capacity response. I've said no to requests because I'm too busy with my own writing, for example, to help edit someone else's project. When a colleague has tried to make me feel guilty for saying no, or has tried to push me into agreeing to help them, a common way they do this is with the technique, if you were really my friend, you'd say yes. If you encounter this response, remember that you can simply turn the tables right back by responding, if you were really my friend, you'd respect my need to prioritize my own work and not put this pressure on me. The third C I want you to remember stands for compliments. This is the strategy of saying no by telling someone that they don't need your help through complimenting their ability to get the job done themselves. I have a friend who uses this strategy quite a bit. She's a professional interior decorator, and sometimes her friends ask her for help in decorating their homes, but they don't want to pay for her services. She avoids helping them for free by simply telling them, you're so stylish and creative, I don't even think you need my help. The compliment strategy allows you to flatter the other person while still saying no. Of course, you want to be sincere, so only use this when you can do so ethically. But it's amazing how it can empower people to solve their own problems much of the time. It allows you to avoid being an enabler, while also freeing you from pleasing them to your own detriment. When you're sailing through the seven seas, the next C you can use to stop people pleasing is connections. Maybe your friend asks you to help with something that you don't want to do, but you know that they really can't do it on their own. In this case, the compliment strategy isn't going to work. The connections tactic is where you suggest other people you know who could help instead of you. You might say, for example, I don't think I'm the best person for this task. Or, unfortunately, I'm not available to help you right now, so let's brainstorm someone else who could help you instead. Have you considered person X? This gets you out of the obligation, but still offers the other person some kind of support. You don't want to simply pass the buck of responsibility, but you might actually be able to foster a real relationship between the two other parties or help them network with each other in a meaningful way. So this doesn't have to be insincere. The next two C's on the list are more standard and classic strategies. C number 5 stands for compromises. You might not be able to completely say no to something or someone, and you might not always want to. So you can always remember that compromise is an option. You could say, I don't think I can take on that complete responsibility, but I can help with part of it. I could help with this specific portion. Or if you're being asked about a time commitment that makes you uncomfortable, you could say, I can't do that immediately, but I will be available at this time. Or I can't get that done within the time frame you've suggested, but if you can give me this extra amount of time, then I would be able to help. Or, I can't help you all weekend, but I am free from 1 to 3 o'clock on Sunday. All of these compromise strategies allow you to offer help and avoid feeling guilty, but build in some protection for your needs. The key is to make sure you're maintaining the boundary of what really does protect your physical and mental health. So, when you follow through with the portion of help you've offered, build in a way to make sure it gets cut off when you've said it will, so that the other person can't guilt you into staying longer. You could arrange for someone to pick you up from the location at a certain time, for example, so you have a built in escape hatch from the situation. A similar strategy is the sixth C on the list, which I'm calling counteroffers. When you think of counteroffers, you're basically going to say no to whatever the person has initially asked of you, and you're not really going to compromise. Instead, I'm suggesting that you give the person a list of alternative options they can choose from, sort of like a multiple choice question or choose your own adventure in real life. Let me give you an example. I have a friend who had never been out of the country before and wanted me to go with her on a trip to Paris. I've been fortunate enough to go to Paris several times before, so I wasn't really interested in the expense it would take to go somewhere I had already been. But I was willing to go somewhere else with my friend instead. So I gave her a list of places I would really enjoy going, and we ended up spending a lovely week on the beach in Mexico. If you decline the person's first offer, you probably still want to make sure you don't hurt their feelings and maintain the relationship. By saying, I can't do what you're asking, but I can do option A, B, or C, which of those would you like? You build in respect for yourself by saying no to something that you don't want to do and respect for the other person. You empower them by allowing them to pick from your list of alternatives, making sure both of you are happy with the end result. There's only one more C to sail through on the list. The last C stands for the word concise. I want you to remember that you're allowed to use the simple, concise strategy of just saying, no, thank you. Especially if the other person involved in the situation is a complete stranger, this is always an option. But if you're a perpetual people pleaser, this might seem impossible to you at first. You might think, wow, I could never be so rude. In fact, saying no, thank you is not rude. First of all, in a lot of situations, the other person is trying to manipulate you, get you to buy something, and so on, potentially while you are just minding your own business. So the argument could be that they were the one being rude, not you. It's also true that when you start to make a long, complicated, or drawn out excuse for why you're saying no to a simple situation, the other person might pick up on the fact that you're nervous or not particularly confident. In short, they might smell your fear, which opens you up for their counterattack. Keeping things simple gives you at least the appearance of confidence, which means they're more likely to accept your no and leave you alone. There's also something very freeing and empowering in simply saying no and walking away from someone. Try it and see how you feel. Don't be rude. Just smile, say, no thank you, and walk away. Remember the words from the very first lecture in this course. You're allowed to prioritize yourself. You're allowed to value and protect yourself. It's okay for you to say no. So let's review each part of your navigation course on sailing through the 7 Cs. Your list of possible techniques or options on how to say no and maintain healthy boundaries is as follows: calendar, capacity, compliments, connections, compromises, counteroffers, concise. Of course, you might be able to add even more tips, tricks, and techniques to this list. What does and doesn't work for you is going to be individual. Modifying these tactics and knowing what's in your comfort zone is completely up to you. But I encourage you to stretch yourself, especially at first. Just like any other kind of exercise, at first it might be painful. But with practice, you'll grow in confidence, and the habit will become second nature. Let me end this lecture and this course with one more theory from psychology that hopefully inspires you to maintain the motivation to change your people-pleasing ways. It's called the theory of planned behavior. The theory attempts to predict when people will actually follow through with their intentions, because a lot of people say or think they're going to do something, but never do. If you're like most people, for example, you've probably made lots of New Year's resolutions that only lasted a few weeks, or maybe even a few days. The theory of planned behavior says that when people make plans about behaviors they want to do in the future, the likelihood they will successfully achieve those goals is based on three factors. The first is the strength of their attitudes toward the behaviors and goals in the first place. I assume that the fact you've made it to the end of this course means you have a strong, positive attitude toward changing your behaviors, which is wonderful. That's positively correlated with success. The second factor in the theory of planned behavior is called perceived control. Perceived control is basically defined as whether you think you can achieve the goal. This goes back to some of the research I discussed in earlier lectures with personality traits and mental outlooks, such as growth versus fixed mindset. If you want to become less of a people pleaser in the future, you have to fully believe that you have control over your decisions and outcomes. You have to truly be optimistic that change is possible and that the exercises will make you more comfortable and confident over time. Essentially, you have to inspire yourself. The third and final factor in the theory of planned behavior is called subjective social norms. I suspect that for perpetual people pleasers who want to change their ways, this component will be the biggest hurdle. Subjective social norms are defined as your perception of what other people are doing and thinking, and what you believe they will think of you if you decide to go through with your plan. In other words, it's what you think is normal behavior in your social environment and how you think other people are judging your behaviors. Presumably, you've been a people pleaser this entire time, either because you think it's expected of you or because you're chronically worried about what other people think of you. If you're desperate for social acceptance, then subjective social norms are a really big deal. You might fantasize about speaking up for yourself, boldly maintaining boundaries, and saying no when people ask you for outrageous favors, but you find yourself quickly backing down when the opportunities actually present themselves because you simply can't get over this final hurdle. All the planning, goals, and clever techniques in the world won't make a difference if you're afraid to use them because you still worry about what others think of you. That's why I spent so much time at the start of this lecture talking about the inspirational story of Simone Biles. Remember that she said no while literally millions of people were watching. She said no after building up to a moment for years when her teammates and the entire country were depending on her. She said no, even though she knew that she would probably be publicly shamed and bullied for it, which she was. But she also became a role model. Because Simone Biles said no, she protected her own mental and physical health. Millions of people praised her for having the courage to see her own limits and to stand up for herself. Millions of people said that she inspired them. I want her to inspire you too. And I have another goal. I want you to change your behaviors in a way that makes you happier and healthier. Eventually, I want you to become someone else's inspiration. You can become the role model of strength, courage, and confidence that someone else sees. The bottom line is that you can say no and maintain healthy boundaries while still being polite and respecting others. If you remember the psychological research findings you've learned about in this course, practice the techniques, are patient and forgiving of yourself when you make mistakes, and freely celebrate your own successes, you'll make the change to being a better, healthier version of yourself. You deserve it.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.